Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking to you about the three biggest mistakes I've made in my real estate investing journey. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Param. I am a radiologist in Southern California, a mom and a real estate investor and I currently have about 300 million in assets under management. And I've built a community, Generational Wealth MD, to help other physicians accelerate on their path to financial freedom using real estate. We are now at about 20,000 physicians strong. I call this episode what I like to call Hard Knocks University. This is where I talk about my mistakes so you can learn from my mistakes and avoid making the same mistakes. So I was thinking about what my three biggest, mistakes would be. And sometimes it's hard because I think we like to gloss over some things and it's hard to be completely vulnerable and honest. But what I'm going to do today is like really try to talk about what I think are the three biggest things that I would consider my biggest mistakes that I think you would benefit from the most. Okay, so the first one is not understanding the ROI from my real estate portfolio. Okay, and so here, let me see if I can make this bold. We'll just leave it as is. I think the important thing over here is that my first property, I purchased it, $150,000 property. I put 25% down, and I had about $500 hitting my bank account every month, right? Which was a 10% ROI, right? From cash flow. And I looked at it, and this is when I didn't really understand what all the different ways that I was making money out of my property. But I looked at it and said, with this $500, how is this ever going to get to the point where it replaces my clinical income, right? So I put real estate on the back burner. This was in 2014 when I started out, and it was a long time. It was another, almost 7 years before I actually accelerated my real estate investing, right? So that was my biggest mistake, not really understanding the ROI. So if you look at that property, because in hindsight, that property, yes, it had about 10% in ROI from cash flow, right? Which was about $500. But what I didn't realize was that I had about 6% ROI on that property from debt pay down. So what does that mean? Every time I'm using the rent to pay down my mortgage, a portion of that goes towards equity that I have in the property, right? A portion of that is going towards the principal. That is about 6 to 8%, right? And I didn't realize that. I just didn't see that going in initially. It wasn't something you can easily see and measure, right? And apart from that, I was getting about a 12% ROI from appreciation. Now, what does that mean? On average, right, a real estate is an inflation controlled asset, which means that if inflation in this country is 3 to 4% every year, just to be very conservative, right, property prices are increasing. And this is not true. Some years they go up 10%, some years they barely go up, right? So on average, historically, property prices are going up 3%. That's a very conservative number. It's actually closer to 4. Now, because I have only 25% down in that property, right, because I'm using leverage, I didn't buy the property all cash. My actual ROI from that market appreciation, even though it's only 3% appreciation annually, was actually 12%, right? So I was just looking at this $500 hitting my bank account, and I didn't realize everything else that was happening in the background. And when I actually realized this was about 5 years later. 5 years later, I realized that I had about 70,000 in equity in the property. My equity in the property had increased by 70,000 more than what I had put in. So I believe I put in about 150K. I put in about 25%. So I had almost 40,000 in it, 37,000 as a down payment to purchase that first property. But 5 years later, I had an additional 70,000. So I had almost $110,000 in that property, right? And that was my equity in the property. The rest of it was the loan. So the loan keeps decreasing, but your equity keeps increasing over time. And so I was able to do a cash out refinance and pull out almost $50,000 and use it for my next property, right? So that's almost 100% ROI in a 5-year period just from equity buildup, which I wasn't seeing. I was seeing the cash flow. I wasn't seeing the equity buildup. So I would say that was my first biggest mistake, right? Not really understanding how my returns from real estate work. So I was just looking at it and saying, this is really not going to cut it. I'm not really going to go down this route, which was in hindsight a huge mistake because I had about over 25% ROI, from the property. And the interesting thing also is that this $500 over time, over those 5 years, the rents went up from $1,500 to $2,000. So this went up to $1,000 in cash flow, which was a 20% ROI. So as you can see, inflation is your friend with real estate. And my ROI from that property after 5 years was close to 40% annually, right? Just it started off at around 20-25%, and then it got closer to 40%. So that's what I didn't understand. And if I had understood that, I probably would have made wiser choices. So that would be point number one, right? That was my first big mistake. Now, what about my second biggest big mistake? Now, this was something that I did with my second property, right? So I feel like my first two properties, I was just like learning from my mistakes, right? So the second mistake that I made, as far as the biggest ones, in terms of real estate, is not understanding the power of leverage. So this property I purchased for $180,000, right? And I didn't use a loan. I just paid for it all cash because I said, I don't want to get $500 in cash flow. Now I want to get $1,000 in cash flow, but right, because I didn't have a mortgage to pay, and so I was getting $1,000, and it seemed like that was a smarter investment because now I was increasing my passive income significantly more. But here's the funny thing: that first property I had put down $37,000, and I was making 500. I was putting 500K into my $500 into my pocket every month. The second property, I put in $180,000 and I was getting $1,000. So my ROI on that property from cash flow was only about 6% compared to that first property where it was closer to 10%, right? So my ROI from cash flow was low. My cash hitting my bank account was much higher, but considering the amount of money I had invested in that property, it wasn't really, I would have made more money if I'd spread that out between multiple properties, right? Now, I didn't have that 6% debt paid on. I didn't have it, right? Because I didn't have a mortgage on that property. And then my ROI from market appreciation was only 3%. Because in the other property, the first property, if you noticed, I had the leverage multiplier because I only put 25% down, right? So although the property was appreciating by 3%, because I only had 25% down in the property, I had the leverage multiplier. My ROI was actually 12%, much higher, right? So eventually, end of the day, while I had my first property where I started off having about, about 25% ROI annually, right? Actually, slightly more than that. The second property, I only had about 8% ROI, right? So significantly lower, about a third, in terms of my return for the capital invested. But I didn't realize it because I was more concerned about the cash flow hitting my bank account. And I made a mistake in terms of analyzing what I was doing. And so going out later, I went back, I think, 3 years later, and I refinanced the property, and I was able to pull out, the capital that was stuck in there, and I used it to purchase another property. So I eventually ended up getting a mortgage on that property, but that was my path. So I learned from mistakes. Now, the third big mistake that I think I made in terms of my real estate portfolio, which I hope you will not make in your real estate journey, is the role of education in scaling. So I am an immigrant when I came in, and I think I started investing in 2014. And like I said, my first property was in 2014. My second property I acquired in 2018. All of these were typically when I was on maternity leave. The second property I acquired during my maternity leave, and I was just slowly scaling because I didn't understand the impact of real estate investing. The other thing that I didn't understand was the value of education, right? So if you told me in 2014, hey, Param, join a coaching program and learn strategies and you can start scaling, it would not have made any sense to me. That was just not the person I was. Now I spend 6 figures in coaching annually, and I do it because I realize the impact of education and scaling. So how did that help me? The first property I acquired, right? I did not really know any strategies. I was going in blind. I was replicating something that I'd seen a colleague do, right? And that first property, it took me 6 years to get to about a 200% ROI from the property, right? A 200% ROI. It took me 6 years to get to that point. Now, and then that was when I did not really lean into education. Now, I have a free ebook, and for those of you who've never seen the ebook, in the comments, if you say ebook, we will DM you the ebook. I want you to go ahead and say ebook in the comments. What what I learned is like between when I had my rough career transition and I went through burnout and I realized that something had to shift. All of this happened between 2019 and 2020, during the pandemic. 2019, there was a merger at work. I picked another job. There was a 6-month period in between where I was transitioning. It was a rough transition for my family. Then the pandemic hit, and after the pandemic hit, I went through burnout. And through all of this, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to keep working 40 hours a week for the next 20 years to get to financial freedom, and I needed to shift. That's when I realized all these mistakes that I made my real estate portfolio. That's when I leaned into education. That's when I joined, courses on tax planning and asset protection, and I leaned into education. Well, when I did that, I was then able to purchase a property. And then in the ebook, I actually go over both of these properties as 2 separate case studies. I give you my actual numbers, how I invested, what strategies I used, and how I was able to scale. But this property, let's call it property X, it took me 6 months, right, to get a 200% ROI from this property, right? So 6 months to get the 200% ROI. So with education, I went from taking 6 years to get to 200% ROI. So if I'd invested 40,000 in my first property, to be able to get 80,000 into my pocket took me 6 years. But once I learned the strategies that I needed to learn, right, to scale, I was actually able to shelter my clinical income from taxes. I sheltered about $250,000 of clinical income from taxes. And using these advanced strategies within a few years, right, that period from 2020 to 2021, I was able to scale to 6 figures in passive income and quit my full-time position as a physician, as full-time position as a physician. Interestingly, that is a complete sentence. I was able to do that, and that's because I was able to generate up to 200% ROI in the period of 6 months. In the ebook, I lay down the exact strategies that I use, the actual numbers, so you can actually see how that works. But I would not have believed you if you told me this in 2014 when I started investing, right? So really not understanding the impact of education and scaling, I would call my third big mistake. And in hindsight, if I knew everything that I know now, if I had understood the value of education and scaling in 2014, I would have just leaned into it. And that was probably a better time to have been investing in real estate. In 2 to 3 years, I would have hit financial freedom. And then I would have had the ability to work in medicine because I got to do it, not because I had to do it, right? And that's what I want for you, which is why I think these strategies are super powerful. So in the comments, type ebook if you want us to DM you the ebook. I have the case studies over there. I lay out all the numbers. It's simple and it's easy for you to understand. And I'm hoping that I've given you, like, in sharing the 3 biggest mistakes that I made, I'm hoping I've given you valuable pointers that you can use. Like I said, it's Hard Knocks University. Sometimes you just have to learn from your own experiences, but you don't have to always. You can learn from my mistakes. So I hope that this is valuable and that you never make these mistakes. And as you scale, you're using my 3-step framework for scaling real estate, which we'll be going over in the free event. So I'll see you guys there.